did have a question. Sorry, it took me a while to get my mute turned off.
Sure.
If we've been approved to take the exam, should we sign up for 3 sections or 4 sections, given the course schedule at Golden Gate?
I don't know.
Okay.
I saw your email, but maybe we'll have some time after.
Fine.
As a case-by-case basis. I saw your email. I would have to look at the calendar and see when the terms are going to start and end and that kind of thing. And I didn't get a chance to do that. But if you want to do that, we can. Okay. All right, good. We'll do that towards the end. Sort of a one-on-one thing because it depends on who's taking what when, you know. So why don't we go ahead then? If there are any other questions. Okay. Yeah.
I did the GAO write-up for the guest speaker, and I was wondering if the write-up how many pages I need to write for GAO guest speaker, because I know we need to write 3 pages, but for GAO I think you wrote I think the requirement is 2 pages long.
They're all 3 pages, whichever one you do. It's only one, right? So the metric that you should use is 3 pages.
Okay.
It's not going to vary by organization. I think some of those I was doing as an extra credit or something for another class. So for this class, it's 3 pages.
For extra credit, is it 6 pages?
Speaker write-up. Final paper rubric. Three-page paper, that's for the PwC. If you want extra credit, 6 pages. And the number of pages is the same. What's confusing, I think, is that, you know, I'm not varying the pages by the organization. For the other ones, the SEC, GAO, and any of those other ones, for example, PwC will also be here this week to speak about something different than what they're going to speak about at the later date. So I probably should add PwC to here. This is somewhat of a moving target because I'm adding speakers as we go along. For example, tomorrow, Thursday, Moss Adams is also going to speak, but it should be 3 pages. Okay, because I'm not varying it by organization. So it really should be 3 pages. Same number of pages. The only reason there's a different rubric is it's different questions. So for all the ones, Security Exchange, GAO, now PwC, Moss Adams. There's 2 different PwCs, okay? Those all need to be 3 pages. All of them need to be 3 pages. And then the PwC one, which is really going to come at a later date, that one is going to be different set of questions. So if you look back at the information here, you've got 2 PwCs, one on 8/9 and one tomorrow, 7/29. So I'd have to edit this, I guess.
So is it possible to get extra credit by just doing another speaker? Just doing 2 speakers?
I don't really think you guys need extra credit. I mean, I'm not grading you on anything other than doing things.
Okay.
So, you know, and it just puts an additional burden on me to create another thing for you to submit. So really, the whole notion of extra credit to me in this class is kind of moot. Why do you need extra credit unless you're planning to not prepare for the exam, which doesn't exactly turn me on. So, you know, I would say I'm not really very interested in extra credit in here. So don't worry if you did 3 pages. It's not, you know, there's no sense in trying to do another one. Now, if you want to come to the presentation, I'm more than happy to have you. What I don't want to do is have to set up another grading thing when at the end of the day, it doesn't add up to anything, if that makes sense.
That's okay. No problem.
Yeah, but if you want to come to them, they're pretty good. I thought the GAO one went pretty, I mean, I'm not objective because GAO is my old office and it was my old boss that was on the call. I don't know if some of you may have a different opinion, but I thought it was pretty interesting discussion last time. So if you want to come to them, you know, out of interest, out of curiosity, because I'm sure on Thursday night you've got nothing better to do, then come on in, the water's fine, you know. But if you sitting there saying, I don't want to go, I wouldn't come just for an extra credit. So 6 p.m. to 7:30 on this coming Thursday is going to be PwC. They're going to talk about what it's like to come into a public accounting firm. And then all of a sudden, the firm starts asking you a lot of information about your personal banking, your spouse's information. You're like, what the hell's going on here? That's to allow them to maintain their independence requirements. And so I thought it was worthwhile for you folks to hear before they join the firms what that's all about. The other one that we're going to have, which will be on the same date, but that's going to be this coming Thursday. That's going to be from 8 p.m. to, you know, my buddy Ali is going to probably want to get off of there about 9:30 p.m. so he can go take care of his kids. But that could go to 10. That's going to be Moss Adams. And what Moss Adams is going to talk about is something called peer review. So what peer review is when a CPA firm of a similar size, of one size, goes in and looks at a CPA firm of a similar size, it comes in to see if they have a quality control structure that allow them to maintain their independence, to do their audits ethically, to do their audits according to standard. So that's going to happen from 8 to 9:30. In terms of the final paper, I'd like to put something else up there. So let's delete that one. And let's put the one that I just think I saved. I don't want any zip files here. I don't know why it's showing me zip files. I'm not asking for that. Okay, I see. I guess I gotta do it that way. Okay, this file's in use. I just saved it though to save 3 pages. That one already said 3, and make sure I fix the GAO one now to say 3 pages. Save that. Close that. Close it, make sure I'm getting the latest one now. Okay, so those got to be 3 pages. The only difference is between the 2 rubrics is if you do the later PwC one, it's a different set of questions. But if you do the ones for any of the other guest speakers, which again is now all that's left, is PwC, the more onboarding, independence, ethics consideration, Moss Adams, which is peer review. City and County of San Francisco is going to talk about their whistleblower program. And then there'll be another one on 8 and 9. And that one's going to be in the morning on a Monday. And that particular one is PwC talking about startup companies and whatnot. We were able to record the GAO one. I don't know about PwC. I don't know about Moss Adams. I don't know about City and County of San Francisco because I don't tell them what to record. They tell me what they'll allow me to record. GAO agreed to a recording, so you've got that recording there. If you can't make it to any of these times, PwC will probably let me record those. Although this particular one, although I've heard some rumblings now that they're getting a little nervous about coming and speaking to my Stanford class because it's a client and they're afraid. And CPA firms spend most of their time being afraid. That's one may not be recorded, it may. So all else fails, you can watch the GAO recording. And I think I have put that up now, right? I know I did that. At least I did that. Oh, come on. Really? Are you really going to do this? Okay. I think I at least did that, right?
Yeah, you did. I seen it out there.
Okay, good. Thank you, Matthew. So that recording is there. You know, should be there. Question about that now? 3 pages. Don't worry about extra credit. It's not going to make any difference. Just make sure you do one of these.
That PwC on the 29th, is that using that same GGU Zoom link? Or is it a different Zoom link?
The Zoom link is the same for every one of these.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if it was one in your Stanford class or whatever. So, okay, gotcha.
The other, you're right. I'm not sure. I'll have to give you that. Check with me again on that. The
Okay.
Zoom link for these is all the same. Yeah, that might change. You know what? Hang on a minute. I've given them, sorry guys, we're using class time up here to do this, but okay, I can't find that link. I know I sent it to him already, but the freaking thing is not going to let me find it right now. So I already had that, given him that link. So it seemed like it should have been one of these emails had it. I know it was, I just looked at it today and it was there. Now I can't find it. Do it this way. Is that the same one, Matthew, or a different one?
Let me log in. Let me go back to
That's all right. It doesn't matter. I'll just put it up there. I'm never sure why I can see something, but then they don't let me set me up so I can edit it right here. Any thoughts on where my guest speaker module just went?
under syllabus, I thought.
There it is. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah, I think it is. Is it a different one, or was all that just for fun? It's the same one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that was enjoyable. But I run you through all that so that you get to see why I don't have any hair anymore. Okay, any other questions on that now? So 6 page, 3 pages, 2 different rubrics. The later PwC one has a different rubric, same Zoom link. Any other questions? And you got the video for the GAO. If there are other videos that they let me record, I'll put them here too. Okay. Anything else? All right, good. Let's go ahead then. And with no further ado, let's run ourselves into our finishing up of chapter 3. This every time to pressing the button because the stupid thing flies out as soon as you put it in tablet mode. Okay. All right, good. And I'm in full screen mode, so that's good. So I can go ahead and get started. Okay. So we're going to pick up with module 3, and what we're going to talk about here at the beginning is something called activity-based costing. Now, remember, we've already talked about how we will have a predetermined overhead rate. We'll have our total estimated overhead for the period. We'll have our total estimated whatever driver, say direct labor hours. And what's anticipated there is you would have a plant-wide overhead rate. Now, most entities will probably be a little more sophisticated than having a plant-wide. They might have a department by department overhead rate, but coming more into practice now is something called activity-based costing. And with activity-based costing, what we do is we come up with multiple pools and multiple rates. And then depending on if a particular procedure or job uses up a particular resource, that determines to what extent we will actually apply an overhead rate based on the various activities that are used up by a resource, by a product, I should say, or particular service. Okay. So when we look, notice we say here that a single, which is a traditional costing system, has a single cost pool and a single plant-wide rate. Okay, overhead application rates using a single allocation base, and they're generally volume-based. And the classic is direct labor hours. You could have machine hours as well. What we do with activity-based costing is we have multiple pools. We have multiple drivers. And if you have multiple pools and multiple drivers, you have what? Multiple rates. And the rates are determined by activity. And then and you can flashcard traditional versus activity-based costing, what the key takeaways are there. And then depending on whether or not a particular product or a particular procedure or service line uses up those particular resources to the extent that they utilize those resources, that's how we'll apply the rates. So if you take a look at the next page, just a couple of things about the characteristics of activity-based costing, and notice it can be part of a job order cost system, can be used for manufacturing or service entities. So if you're doing manufacturing, you may be trying to better allocate your cost per product. If you are talking about a service organization, say a hospital, say you're trying to figure out the cost of a particular surgery procedure. Well, rather than sit there and just use a hospital-wide overhead rate, it may make more sense to go ahead and figure out, well, for surgery, what is the proper driver and the proper pool to allocate a particular cost? So, for example, if you're talking about trying to allocate the housekeeping cost to the surgery department, right? Well, surgery is harder to clean than, say, even the ER, emergency room. And I was reading something here because I was looking at something else for activity-based costing, not necessarily for our class, but for another class. And the thing was all about how the ER has a more intensive cleaning procedure than does other parts of the hospital. That is obviously something that was written by somebody who never picked up a mop in a hospital in their entire life. I have. And I can tell you right now that you don't sit there and do exhaustive detailed cleaning in the ER room while they're bringing in the next bloody patient. Okay, what you're doing is you're quickly cleaning that thing to get it in there so the next person can come in. Surgery is different. Okay, surgery, you're going to have to sit there and you're going to have to use certain cleaning procedures and whatnot. So you could come up with a situation where you're going to allocate the housekeeping costs by the length of the procedure. The more time that is spent with that patient, the more time that there's going to be potentially cleaning. In the ER, half the time is spent just the person just sitting there waiting to be seen, right? Okay. And so again, maybe a surgeon would be sitting there laughing at what I'm saying. My point is, you can come up with different drivers, and depending on how much of that activity is used by that particular driver, then that's how you'll allocate the cost. You say, okay, well, now the amount of housekeeping that goes to the surgery department is more than the amount of housekeeping that goes to the ER. So now when we sit here and we know how much to properly allocate to the surgery department, now we can allocate that over what procedures based on how many hours in a particular procedure is, so that we get a better cost for procedures when we're trying to price out what we might charge for a surgery of, heart surgery versus moving an appendix or something. Okay, so you come over and you take a look at an example here that's pretty good, that starts to get into what some of the factors are that could cause a cost distortion with a plant-wide overhead rate versus breaking those out by activity. Okay, so we've got this company, and they're using direct labor hours as the application base. They have 150,000 direct labor hours, and they have products, bottles and cans, and they produce the bottles use 150. The can incurred 150,000 direct labor hours. The bottle used 45. So it's a total of what? 195. I think I said 150 total. It's 150,000 plus 45,000 gives us a total of 195,000 direct labor hours, right? Okay. And then you start looking, they produce 500,000 cans, 150,000 bottles, and then they start getting into the cost driver for these different activities: materials handling, production orders, production redesign, plant utilities. And so let's just go ahead and add up the total of these drivers. So it's what? 160,000 pounds. LBs, okay? And then what? Number of production orders, 100 for each, so that's a total of 200 orders, I guess. We'll label that, okay? Number of changes for product redesign, 50 for cans, 200 for bottles. Whatever we want to call that, changes. And then you look at the machine hours, 150,000 machine hours for cans, 80,000 for bottles. What's that, 230? Machine hours. Okay, all right, good. Now you're looking, they're using direct labor hours right now. You see the cost of each one of those. I guess if I add up these costs, it's actually done on the next page, but just to make sure we're seeing where the information on the next page is coming from, I'm going to go ahead and just total that up. $3,120,000. Okay. Now, if you stuck with their current system, then they would take that $3,120,000. They would divide that by the 195,000 hours, 150 plus the 45. That would give us what? $16 per direct labor hour. And so then if you allocated that based on the amount that would go for cans, 150, the amount of hours that would go for the bottles times the 16, you go ahead, you allocate those costs. Now you've got 2.4 for cans, 270 for bottles. And so you take that 2.4 and you divide it by the number of cans. That's showing you that the can cost you $480. And you do that for the bottles, that shows you that your overhead costs, right? We're ignoring indirect costs here, are $480 per bottle. Okay, so at least looking at it from the standpoint of overhead, you'd sit there and say, okay, well, there's really no more cost associated with developing a bottle versus a can, okay? Now, what we do with activity-based costing here is we're going to go ahead and come up with the rate per activity. So again, you saw the numbers, 480 for the materials handling, right? And there was a total of 160,000 pounds being handled. So you take the 480, divide that by the 160, means it costs you $3 per pound to handle the materials. Okay, production orders, there were 200 orders. The cost is 90,000. 90,000 divided by 200 orders means it's $450 per order. Okay, I'm going to do one more, guys, because I think you're seeing where the numbers are coming from here. 250 cost, 250,000 cost divided by 250 changes. That's an expensive activity, isn't it? $1,000 per change. Okay, let's go ahead and underline that one too, just because that's going to kind of be the moral of this story here by the time we get done. And then, you know, I'm not going to go back up, guys. $10 per machine hour. Okay, then you look and you say, okay, good. Now that I know it costs what, $3 per pound, and since I'm using 100,000 pounds of materials to produce cans, then I should allocate 300,000 of the material material handling cost to the cans. Okay, 100 orders. Okay, $4.50 per order. Okay, for the cans here, and they had the same number of orders, $4.50 for the bottles. Notice that we use the $3 here for the bottles, and they were using 60,000 pounds, so we take 180,000 in cost there. Then when we get to the changes, 50 changes for cans, 50 times 1,000 per change is 50,000. But look what happens here. That very costly activity, when you have 200 changes, causes a great deal more of the overhead charges to go to bottles, because they're using up more of that fairly expensive activity. And so when you get done with the whole thing, you take all of those costs that were allocated to the cans, you divide that by the number of cans. Now my overhead cost per can more accurately shows me $3.79 versus what? If I take the total overhead cost and divide it by the number of bottles, now that's showing me that my bottles are $8.16 per bottle. Okay, so I'm sure they engineered the numbers to, really make you feel the impact here. But you can see that now we realize, hey, if we're going to use up our plant's capacity, we're going to use that capacity up producing, what do you think, bottles or cans?
Cans.
Cans.
We're going to use it up producing cans, unless we think our bottles are so beautiful that we can, be the design leader in bottles, or something. And we're trying to be the, best bottle maker on the history of the planet or something. Then, and we're going to do high-end bottles, then maybe, this feeds into our strategic plan to, produce bottles or something. But I would think, there is no really such thing as beautiful bottles. And so who cares, right? And so we're probably going to focus on cans. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over and let's talk about service cost allocation. And yeah, we could go ahead and allocate our service using activity-based costing. And they say hospitals use complex methods to allocate service-related costs such as patient admissions or housekeeping to various hospital departments. Okay. And yeah, I could see in a hospital example, again, I would use, I see it a lot of times, they want to use, some hospitals, you'll see, they'll say, well, use floor space. Well, that's not a very good measure, because you could have a huge, area of the hospital that uses very little housekeeping, right? Because it's fairly easy to clean. Use floor space, that's not a very sophisticated method. The length of the procedure, I'm telling you, the longer the surgery, the harder it is to clean up after. And if you don't believe me, I'll tell you some, gory stories offline about what it's like to clean a surgery room after a hip surgery. Okay, so maybe the length of the procedure, and sometimes someone might say, well, how would they know the length of the procedure? I'll tell you how, because the insurance companies pay on how long the procedure is. Okay, so if they're going to sit there longer, the insurance company is going to pay more for a procedure that takes more time versus less. So the insurance companies make them track the time. I was on an assignment with GAO one time where they wanted Medicare, Congress wanted us to look at reimbursement for anesthesiologists. And they wanted us to look at the amount of time that went from induction to when they put you under the anesthesia to first incision. So there are literally records in the hospital as to how long it takes them from the time they put you under to when they first cut. Now, what I thought was ridiculous about that measure that was being used there, and I did not design that out of program, I'm like sitting there and I'm saying to myself, so let me see. So we think an anesthesiologist is putting people under Leaving them in the anesthesia and sitting around waiting to book more time before they start to do the surgery, I don't think so. I mean, when you put on someone under anesthesia, you're killing them essentially, and you're shoving a tube down their throat to keep them breathing during that time that you have killed them. So, no one messes around and says, let's, put this guy on death's door a little bit longer, and so we can make some more money. But anyway, they do track those statistics though at the hospital. So there probably would be information to be available to the length of the procedure. Okay. Anyway, when we talk about allocating service costs, there are two methods: direct method, and under the direct method, each service department costs are allocated directly to production departments without recognizing that service departments themselves may use the service of other service departments. Go ahead and flashcard that. For the direct method, that's not very realistic, even though it is the most commonly used. And go ahead and you can include that on your flashcard, okay? Because it's less complex, but it's not very realistic. For example, if I'm sitting there and I'm trying to allocate admin cost, not admin, but the admission department cost to the rest of the departments, say the surgery and the ER and the ophthalmology department or something like that, and I don't sit there and first allocate the housekeeping cost to the admission cost. And housekeeping touches every department in the hospital, right? Except maybe one area in the hospital I worked in. The engineers never wanted the housekeepers to go into their area, so I can't imagine what kind of mess was in there. But almost every part of the hospital gets some housekeeping. So in most cases in an organization, housekeeping would first get allocated to all the other departments. That is called the step method. And when you use the step method now, okay, you are going to allocate the service department cost to other service departments, as well as the production departments, as well as the service departments. Okay, so flashcard that. So let's just take a look, and we're going to take a look at an example, and it's going to use the same information, but in one case we're going to use the direct method, and then in the other case we're going to use the step down method. Okay, now we have these two departments. We have the information system and the HR department. Okay, and then we have division A and division B, and the company has the two service departments, the information system and human resources. And during the recently completed operating year, the information system had total service cost of $2,200,000, and the HR had $975,000 of costs. Okay, now they go ahead and they talk about computing hours and performance appraisals as the way that they were as the drivers for these two service departments, right? So they go ahead, and if you add the 9 plus the 6, you get what, total 15,000 hours for the information system computing hours. Okay, and then for the performance appraisals, 2,800 plus 2,200, what's that, 5,000 appraisals? A before P in appraisals. Right? Okay. Okay, good. And so then we're going to go ahead and allocate the cost accordingly to division A, division B. And I think you can see where that's going. We take the the 2,200,000, that was the cost in the in the information systems, right? And that's $148 per hour. 975,000 for HR divided by the appraisals, that's $195 per appraisal. Okay, then you take the 9,000 times the a number of hours, excuse me, that were used, and just to remind ourselves, because it kind of gets hard to remember, okay, who was doing what. Division A, right, use 9,000. So for division A, we pick up the 9,000 times that 148, and then 2,800 appraisals, again, for our division A, right, just pick up the division A numbers, right, and then for division B, you pick up the division B numbers. Okay. Okay, good. Now, step down is probably more realistic, but when you look at the example, you kind of lose the reasoning as to why companies would use the direct method more often. It's easy if you're just talking about 2 service departments, but if you're talking about multiple service departments that you're having to sort of cascade the cost down to, that can get a bit cumbersome for an accounting system to do all that, right? And depending on how important, you know, your precision needs to be with this, then that may dictate as to whether or not you're going to go into and try to do what is obviously the more, I don't know if it's obvious, but what you should be feeling is the more accurate method of using the step down method. So let's just take a look at this step down method, and notice here now they tell me specifically performance appraisals administered by the HR department let's see, can I start this, administered by the, maybe if I move it down a little bit, by the HR department to the information system, accounted for an additional 200 appraisals during the operating year. Okay, so now when you take a look, notice we have division A, division B at what, 2,800 and 2,200. That's still what? That's still 5,000. But now they tell us, yeah, but we have what? We have an additional 200 appraisals because of the appraisals that are done in the information system department, the other service department. So now we take that 975, which was the information system, but instead of dividing it by 5,000, we divide it by 5,200. Now it's $187.50 per appraisal. And since the HR department needs 200 appraisals done, that gets us to what? An additional $37,500 of costs that are now going to go to the IT service department. I mean, first they're calling it IS, now they're calling it IT, but the information system service department, and they're getting part of the cost now of the human resources. So now we take the what, 2,200,000 plus this additional 37.5, the 2,200,000 was given in the previous example. We divide that by the 15,000 hours of computing time that was used up, and that gives us 150 cents per hour. And now you go ahead and you allocate the cost of the 150.5 for IT, and then you go ahead and you pick up the 2,800 appraisals times, and notice that changed too. Now we have a new cost, right, per appraisal, and now we've done a better job of sitting there and appropriately allocating now part of the HR cost to the IT department. Okay. This is a fairly straightforward, fairly small example, and you say, well, it's not that big of a deal, John, to first allocate. Yeah, if you only have one service department providing service to one other service department. but that can get a bit complex if you have one service department serving several, and then another one not serving as many, but still multiple, and so on. And it can get very complex at some point. Question. Okay, good. Joint product costing. What happens here? Well, let's say I'm sitting here and I'm a shoe manufacturer. Okay, and let's say I make running shoes. And let's say I make basketball shoes. I need to put the word shoes there, but whatever. Basketball shoes, running shoes. Well, what happens? Well, let's say up to a certain level, there's really no difference between the materials and the labor that's being expended to make running shoes or basketball shoes. Okay, those are considered joint products because they're generated from the same common input. Okay, now what happens? A byproduct is something that is of relatively small value that comes out of my main products, though they may be joint, my main products. For example, I like to use the example swoosh balls. Okay, so if we're talking about Nike, Nike makes running shoes, Nike makes basketball shoes, and then they've got this rubber left over that they can't really shape into shoes, right? So what do? They make those stupid little squishy balls, stress balls or whatever, ball that you can bounce and give to your dog eventually, I guess, whatever, okay? Those might be an example of a byproduct that will come out of the main products here, which could be joint products, for example, running shoes and basketball shoes. And then split off point is the point in which you start using different inputs as you move from the sort of, basic frame to a running shoe versus a basketball shoe. That's considered split off. Okay, so our task, okay, for the exam here is going to be: do we know how to allocate joint product costs between the two joint products? Okay, and there's going to be some different methods that we'll look at. We also want to understand separable cost, or costs that get incurred after the split off point. Okay, so there's different ways that you can do this. One is going to be by volume. Okay, now I think this is pretty important, guys. Anytime you see a question asking you about joint product, okay, they're going to call out to you what the joint costs are, because the whole deal is that we need to sit there and we need to figure out how to allocate the joint costs to the respective products. Joint costs were the costs that went in up into the point of split off, and we need to allocate those to the two products. Okay, so you will always pick up that number, and regardless of the method, that's the number that you're going to then have to allocate to the two products. And then typically we'll call out one product or the other as to which they want to see how much cost of the joint cost should go to one product or the other. Now, in this particular case, they told us there was 30,000 gallons of material that was used for whatever this thing is. I don't really care. And 10,000 was used by product A, and 20,000 was used by product B. Pretty simple, guys. You go ahead. 1/3 goes to product A, 2/3 goes to product B. Okay, and so then they might go a step further and say, well, how much of the joint cost got allocated to each? You add that to the direct cost, and maybe they ask you the total cost of each product. Okay, but obviously the big point of the analysis is right here. Question? Okay, good.
Yeah, I do have a question, and that's it. Is it assumed that joint costs are indirect, or is it assumed that they're direct, or are they like a third thing?
I mean, I would be careful by trying to put them into direct versus indirect, because even though I know they said direct here, which is probably a little distracting for you, because when we talk about direct versus indirect, we're typically talking about product costs that are directly traced versus those that are applied using a predetermined overhead rate. They're obviously not direct though, in that we came up with an allocation method to get them to the product. I don't know. I would stay away from calling them. I mean, I guess you could say by definition they're indirect because we had to allocate them, right? I mean, it's not like we traced it directly. If they were direct, then we would have had them traced directly here. Obviously, we're having trouble keeping track of these costs directly for product A and product B, or we wouldn't have to have done an allocation. But I'm concerned about calling them indirect because I don't want to start to get into this thing where now we're confused as to what the exam typically is talking about when they're talking about indirect costs. Indirect costs are typically overhead costs, which this is not really.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so, but it's not really, I can't tell you and say, oh, it's a direct cost, because it's not, because we're having to allocate it. So, okay. Okay, so it's not an easy question to answer quite the way you framed it, but it's a joint cost. Okay, and we have to allocate it based on, in this case, amount of by volume. Okay, now we could use, and here's another method, relative net realizable value at split off. So what happens? Sometimes you may be able to figure out what you could sell the product for if you sort of sold it in its unfinished form and allocate your joint cost based on the relative value at the point that it was split off. So again, key thing is always pick up the joint cost. You know you're gonna have to allocate those, right? Then they tell us, well, look, if you were to sell this kind of half-done thing at the point before it's a final product, and they have these two products, A and B, okay, at split off point, 100 units of A had sales of $20 per unit, and 400 units of B had sales at $15 per unit. So assuming you could sell this stuff before its final thing, whatever it's going to be, then you would go ahead and multiply the 100 times the 20, the 400 times the 15. That's a total of 8,000. And so the relative values at split off for product A would be, a quarter of that. 3/4 of that would be for the product A would be a quarter. 3/4 would be product B. Okay. Now that can happen, I suppose, in some industries where you produce up to a point and then someone's willing to sell it, willing to buy it from you, and then they'll continue the processing. More likely though, probably that's not going to happen. You're not able to sell the product before it's completely done. Okay. And so what you're going to have to do then is figure out, well, what is the sales value at split off? So what you would do, the net realizable value at split off, essentially take the final selling price, subtract any cost that will be incurred after split off, and you might go ahead and just flashcard that. Okay, so remember to do that. And then you have the relative net realizable values, and that's how you come up with the ratio to allocate your joint cost. Okay, so again, always, first thing I do in any one of these questions, guys, I find that joint cost and I just write that number down. I know that number is going to be in play here for the answer, right? Then what? Then they tell us, and they have these two products. Smith Company produces two products, joint F and G, and joint costs are $30,000. During October, further processing costs beyond split off point needed to convert the product into sellable form were $16,000 and $24,000 for 1,600 units of F and 800 units of G. What always bothers me, the way they write those questions. Now I got to figure out how to line these up, but it's what, 2,500 of unit G could sell for what? Could sell for 25, excuse me, F could sell for 25, and for G, okay, G could sell for 50. Okay, so you got to do G down here, they got down here at 50, and then you got the 800 and the 1,600 units. So, you know, these questions don't win Pulitzer Prizes for being easy to read. Okay, then what? If you use the net realizable value, now you've got to go and figure out, okay, so that means 16,000 for, and that goes with F, and 24,000 that goes with product G. Okay, so you come over here and you figure out what you could sell those for minus the additional cost. That gives you net realizable value after further processing. The total is 40, and you allocate the cost accordingly. Okay, so for me, when I look at these questions, I always get a little irritated because I just have trouble remembering or understanding which cost I'm supposed to line up with which one. So this is a type of question that you absolutely need to write things down as you figure them out. You can never do a question like this in your head. And that's where I see students have trouble, is they sit there and they try to, you know, come up with just one number they can write down for whatever product they're asking. And that is impossible because these numbers spin all over the place on these questions. Okay. Okay, good. Byproducts, like the swoosh balls, whatever, okay, they could be applied to the main product. So you could go ahead and reduce the common cost for the revenue that's generated by the byproduct, and then you have less common cost to allocate. Or you could just report it on your income statement as miscellaneous revenue, because it's probably not a very large number. Okay, and you can just flashcard the options, I guess, there. I don't know that you need 2 flashcards there. You can make that 1 flashcard. Okay, all right, good. Let's go ahead then and let's take a look at our first couple questions for tonight, starting with this one. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this one. Okay, And remember, guys, CPA exam, we're kind of turning our analysis part of our brain, cranking it all the way to the top, right? At all times, okay? You start looking at CPA exam questions, you're sitting there and you're fighting for every possible point. You're squeezing. It's like we're taking a rag and squeezing it as tight as you can to get every drop out of it, whatever, right? Okay, so most of us got it right. Okay, so that's good. The answer here is C. Okay, but let's just take a look at this one. Okay, and they're saying that a manufacturing company has several product lines. Traditionally, has allocated manufacturing overhead costs based on total machine hours. Okay. Under a new activity-based costing system, which of the following overhead costs would most likely have to have a new cost driver? Because now instead of using one driver for everything, we're going to use what? Different drivers for different activities. Okay. So we were using machine hours before. Do machines use electricity? Probably. Okay. And so what happens? I'm thinking, well, electricity expense, the overhead electricity expense could probably still be allocated by machine hours and not be a whole lot of distortment there, right? If machines are used a lot, do you think they're going to need more repair and maintenance?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're using a machine a lot, you're accumulating more machine hours. So repair and maintenance expense probably would be, you know, fairly accurately allocated based on total machine hours. If you use machines a lot, and let's say you were using units of activity method to depreciate the machine, then obviously by definition, then the depreciation expense would probably be allocated over machine hours, particularly if you're using machine hours as your depreciation base. If you're using units of activity method. Employee benefit expense, how do machine hours equate to employee benefit expense? Probably not as clean in that what? You've got some employees that maybe work on machines, okay, so that might work there, but you may have some employees that all they do is sweep. Some employees, all they do is move paper from one place to the other. Some employees, all they do is, tell other employees where to go. And the number of machine hours may have nothing to do with that. Okay, or very little, or not as cause and effect. We're going to talk later about regression analysis, but what a regression analysis will do is tell you how closely correlated an independent variable is to a dependent variable. And you could use some sort of regression analysis to say, well, as my driver moves, how do my costs move? And if you come up with a positively correlated relationship there, then you would probably say, okay, now I can allocate my cost for this particular pool based on this particular activity and have, a statistical reliability as to how effectively you're mapping your costs with activity. Okay, this one was asking me to do it obviously just from my feelings more than anything. Okay. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question. Remember, guys, you go the full 15 rounds with the question. By 15 rounds, I'm using a boxing term, which I don't even think they go 15 rounds anymore. But back in the olden days, a fight went 15 rounds. And, if you knew that you were going to get beat in the fight, you said, at least I want to go the distance. I want to go the 15 rounds, right? So that you could at least prove that you were worthy of the opponent, right? So you go the full 15 rounds. We don't have any surrendering when it comes to these. Now, if you have to surrender after no more than 3 minutes, then you can maybe narrow it down to a couple choices, right? But no giving up just because you get nervous. You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. I gave you a little more time because this one's got a couple layers to it. Okay. What do we got? 5 people giving up, decided they got something better to do. 4, 3. Okay. All right, good. Let's go ahead then and take a look at this one. And share the results, okay? 67% of us got it right, which the choice is C, okay? But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one, and we have to figure out how to allocate the cost, okay? So joint costs are what? 60,000. Okay, we know we got to use that number. So when I get a question like this, I automatically put that number down because I know I'm going to use it. Okay, then they say what should be assigned using net realizable value. And so what happens? Well, we have to sit here and take the sales value minus what? Minus the separable cost. And I always like the way they put these tables together because they like to put them together in a way that doesn't give you the clue as to what it is you're supposed to do. Because if they put the numbers on the other side, it's clear, oh, they want me to subtract that other number. So they didn't want to even give you that little bit of help. Okay, but when we do that, we see, okay, well, that's 72,000 is the net realizable value for AJAC. And for BJAC, the net realizable value, if I'm doing my math right here, is 18,000. The total net realizable value is 90,000. Okay. And so now, and then you just focus on the one they asked you here, which is AJAC. AJAC represents what? 72,000 divided by 90,000. What's that? 80%? Of the cost there. So when you get that math, 60,000, does that come to, I guess, 80%? Right? That gives me the 48,000. Okay. What did you do on that one, Cornelius? 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 Okay. What'd you think, Monica? 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 Man, I'm a good auditor. Man, I'm good. Man, I'm good. You there, Travis? 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 Man, I'm good. I'm good. Okay, good. Let's go
Question on
ahead.
that one? I have a
Huh?
question on that one.
Yeah.
So the separable costs are the same thing as the identifiable cost? Is that what that means?
It means cost after split off. What do you mean?
So that's what so this problem was talking about separable. Okay, got it.
So as they continue to process it, so the sales value is what they'll is, they don't call it that because it makes it too easy, but it's when you see that in a process like that, that's saying to you ultimately they can sell it for that much. But before they can, they're going to have to continue to process it. And for AJAC, it's going to cost them $8,000 to continue to process it. For BJAC, it's going to cost them $22,000. And so there'll be a net realizable sales value of $72,000 for AJAC and $22,000 for BJAC, right? So what they're telling you is no one's going to buy this AJAC thing. It's a hunk of junk. No one's going to buy this BJAC thing at the point that they are split off. It's a piece of junk. I'm not going to be able to sell it to anybody. Before anyone will buy it, I'm going to have to spend $8,000 more to turn AJAC into something that would be sellable. And I'm going to have to spend $22,000 on BJAC, so it will be sellable. So I'll end up with a net realizable value after I continue processing this to get it to where somebody would buy it of $72,000 for AJAC and $18,000 for BJAC. That's a total of $90,000, of which $72,000 of the net realizable value of sale price is attributable to AJAC, the subject of this question, the object of this question. So I did the math on it. So generally, if you ask a question and I answer it, it should either be, oh, okay, now I understand, or I'm still confused.
No, I think I got my terminology a little bit bollocksed up.
Okay, but we're good now. Okay, good. I'm looking for the affirmation that communication has occurred. So that's what I'm looking for. So we're good now with this question? Kathy?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, somebody
Yes,
else.
thank you.
Okay.
I get it now.
Okay, all right, excellent. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a quick break, and we are going to pick up with module 4. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. Please, somebody remind me, okay? Thank you. Okay, so For financial measures, we'll have more later. Okay, we're going to get into that. Where we're going to really focus the next page and a half or so is on non-financial measures. Non-financial measures of what? Non-financial measures of the entity's performance, right? Okay, so we could have something called productivity measures. And productivity measure is basically measuring the ratio of outputs to inputs. Now, generally, there are two types of productivity ratios. One is going to be the total productivity ratio. The other is partial. Now, what I find interesting is they say most frequently measure is the partial, and I'm like, well, why? It wouldn't be as accurate, but I guess it is easier, okay? What we do with a total productivity ratio, we try to take the quantity of all output relative to all inputs used, whereas productivity is partial productivity is probably going to use just the major factor of the input to measure the output. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard the difference between those. There are two types, and one uses all, the other chooses the most used. It's the most used, and it chooses the highest level of input to measure the output. So if you look at the next page here, okay, notice that we have these two products, or this one product, and it uses two inputs. It's going to use both cement and it's going to use plastic. Okay, so it uses 5,000 pounds of cement, 20,000 pounds of plastic, and then they give us the relative cost of each of those inputs. Now we have these 1,000 units of output, okay, whatever these sculptures things are. And so in each case, even for the total, notice the numerator stays the same. It's just, are we going to measure all the inputs or just on the major input? So for a partial, that's the PPR, okay, for the partial, notice they just picked up the 20,000 pounds of plastic because that was materially, I guess they're saying, the largest input that they would use to measure. Okay, now if they had used the total productivity, again, still 1,000, but now, and notice they weighted them. Notice the dollars came in here now as they weighted them by their relative cost to come up with the, now looking at it in terms of dollars, and of course then our answer came out and whatever it is, you know, whatever 0.0 was it, 3 cents or something per unit, per dollar for input, we get 2 cents worth of output. Okay. Okay, good. Now you start to take a look at some of these other benchmarks that we can use, and these are really tools. And a good one is control charts. Okay, and it can basically show whether or not we are living within whatever our performance parameters are. So when you look at this particular example, and I think, you know, the graphic says it all, a control chart, of course it's a chart, so the graphic should say it all, okay, which is we have an upper limit for our defects, a lower limit for our defects, and we're basically trying to get as close to average as possible. Now, the thing that's a little bit interesting with, well, why would we just want to be more to that lower limit? Well, being at the lower limit, okay, and trying to say, well, why wouldn't you want those defects to be at 0? Well, there's certain costs associated with those defects being at 0. For example, now we're going to have to run on machines at a higher level, so we're going to incur more repair and maintenance costs, etc. Okay, so the optimal level would be as close to this average as possible. And notice, you know, we're saying, okay, good, we're coming down from the higher limit to a lower, okay, but now maybe we're getting too close to that lower, so let's try to come back to that average, whatever. So they've got a pretty good trend here going on with, in terms of at least they're lowering the defects, but not so much to a point where they're just incurring all kinds of additional costs to keep those defects from happening. Okay, another is the Pareto diagram. And one of the things I always liked about teaching Becker while I was working at GAO is sometimes I would end up sounding like a genius based on something that I got out of my Becker textbook. We were looking at the cause of findings where housing agencies were being called out for different problems. What we were trying to come up with was for HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to basically look at the different findings that were coming out of audits of housing agencies and seeing if they could find a pattern as to the types of problems that were being identified. And then they should put measures around trying to find those, trying to prevent those problems from happening, with controls around trying to prevent those problems from happening, or at least ways of detecting those problems when they occur. And so what I had suggested at that point is, why don't we go ahead and do a diagram that talks about the types of problems that housing agencies are incurring, and then see how frequently those things happen. And you can literally sit here and create this chart that'll allow you to then work on the different problems. So type 1 problem says, well, you know, they're having a problem because they're, you know, one of the problems we were finding is they were bouncing checks. And my point was, if an entity is bouncing checks, they have financial control problem. I'm sorry, you know. So if that's type 1 problem, then you work on controls to avoid bouncing checks. The type 2 problem is there's poor satisfaction with the way the residents are being handled. Let's say there's a lot of complaints. Then you can start to work on that, and you work at the problems, focusing on the most common problems first, and working your way down to less common problems. So that's what a Pareto diagram allows you to do. So you can focus your attention on the most, most frequently occurring problems. Okay. What a fishbone diagram does is it tries to call out the cause and of different problems. And so we're going to see that on the next page, and that we're going to be able to map the nature of problems that cause the defect. Okay, that's called a fishbone diagram. And guys, even though we're giving you pictures of these things, the most important thing is that you have a flashcard of the definition, but you can see the different problems leading to defects. And so then you can sit here and say, well, for the machinery, let's work on getting the settings, okay? Let's work on wrong consistency of materials and see if we can bring those defects down. Okay, all right, good. Now, when we do types of responsibility segments, okay, and there are different types of responsibility segments, okay, and they are often referred to as strategic business units. And basically, we're going to hold these strategic business units responsible for different measures. Now, what I want you to do is flashcard, and we're going to have flashcard with 4 SBCs, or I should say SBUs, strategic business units. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at this first one, cost strategic business unit. We're going to do a flashcard definition for each of these. Managers are held responsible for controlling cost. Okay, a revenue strategic business unit, and guys, I think the hard part isn't the definition. The hard part, if it's even hard, is just remembering the 4 types of strategic business units. But revenue managers are responsible for generating revenues. Okay. Profit, no shock, managers are responsible for producing a target profit. Okay. And then if we're talking about investment business unit, and there's no difference in the colors here, guys, other than I like to change the colors sometimes. But for investment business unit, they are responsible, that unit is responsible for making investment. Okay. So flashcard those 4. Nothing, terribly difficult other than remembering the 4 strategic business units. Come over areas of accountability. Okay, we can do product line, geographic, customer. Okay, and I'm not going to have you flashcard that because I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, when you're evaluating these different segments of the business, okay, the most we can use a profitability contribution, I should say, reporting method. And so we're going to be focusing on the contribution margin of each unit. And I think you know at this point, we're going to get into break-even analysis later, but I think you know right now that your contribution margin is the difference between your revenue and your variable costs. Okay, so let's just go ahead and let's take a look at controllable margin. Okay, and controllable fixed costs are costs that managers can influence in less than 1 year. We consider those controllable. Okay, flashcard that. Allocation of common costs. Okay, and let's take a look at common costs. And managers have control over variable costs and over controllable fixed costs. Okay, but financial scorecards that use contribution reporting factors factor these costs in. Point of the flashcard here that we have to make: common costs are not controllable. Okay, so what happens? Approaches to the rational allocation of certain central administrative costs must be understood by responsible managers as fair and logical. And so they never make the point, I guess. So I'm going to have to write it in for you. Okay. Do not allocate common cost under responsibility accounting. Okay, so when they're calculating, guys, this is for internal purposes, right? Because sometimes I'll get to say, you mean if we're doing segment reporting for external purposes, we shouldn't allocate common costs? No, not for external reporting. We're talking about for internal reporting, where you're trying to evaluate these different strategic business units. Common cost that they cannot control should not be allocated to that unit. What is an example of a common cost? Example of a common cost, okay, e.g., you can put here CEO salary. Okay, as a manager of a strategic business unit, I don't have any control of what they pay the CEO. And so you shouldn't allocate the CEO's salary as a common fixed cost to a particular strategic business unit because they have no control over that. Okay, so just flashcard, do not allocate common cost under responsibility accounting. Flashcard that, since I don't see that they really made a point other than just say common costs are not controllable.
When you're talking about responsibility reporting, you're not talking necessarily about financial reporting, correct? You're talking about managerial reporting?
Yes, I'm absolutely not talking about financial reporting, because financial reporting is just saying, here's all the costs and here's how I'm going to line them up by whatever natural classification, functional classification. You know, FASB generally doesn't get up in our face and tell us this is exactly how you have to organize your income statement. So you see a lot of flexibility there, but ultimately all costs, expenses, whatever, have to be accounted for somewhere, right? Under responsibility accounting, we don't necessarily have to, you know, find a pigeonhole for every single cost to evaluate what's going on, like you're saying, internally, right? So if you look at the example here, we've got these different regions, okay, that they're using for their different zones of responsibility here. And notice, yeah, the controllable fixed cost, they went ahead and they allocated those to each unit. Now this gets a little bit confusing because now they went ahead and they allocated the controllable fixed, non-controllable fixed costs, and I'm saying no, don't do that. The outcome of this story is what? you take a look, and when you just go ahead and allocate a non-controllable cost, you look at region 4. Don't start this. Don't start with me. Yeah, I'm talking to my pen. Maybe my battery's going out on my pen. Maybe that's the problem. You start with region 4, and when you go to region 4 now, notice that even though when you look at the cost they can control, they've got a pretty good contribution margin, right? But after you allocate these costs that they can't control, they look like the dog in this story. Meanwhile, they're probably the better region and how they're handling the things that are in their control, their revenue, their variable costs, their contribution margins are different, their controllable fixed costs, they're doing a good job. They're at 50, and then we go and we just dump all these non-controllable fixed costs on them, and they look bad when actually they're good. So that's why you don't do that. Okay? Okay, good. Now, these notion of balance scorecard, okay? And what the, must be that my battery in the pen is bad. When we look at the balance scorecard, okay, and go ahead and flashcard the elements of the balance scorecard. And what we're trying to do is balance things like financial results, internal business processes, customer satisfaction, advancement and innovation, learning and growth, okay? And depending on the strategic goals of the company, you can sort of look at how we're going to achieve these different, in some cases, maybe competing objectives of a company's strategy and therefore their critical success factors. Okay, so flashcard critical success factors, but you look at financial versus advancement of innovation in human resources. I don't know. Do you think? Did you hear anything about how much it costs these guys to send these rockets into space? And, I understand that they're doing it because they're trying to advance innovation in human resources. I don't know. I'm looking at it. If I'm like a real astronaut and then some, guy goes just to the point where he can float and then comes back down and then they give him the same status that I am, I'm thinking, what? I went through all that to become an astronaut, and now you can just become an astronaut by spending enough money, right? Okay, but supposedly what they're saying is, well, by doing this, they'll advance innovation and human development, learning and growth, right? But that may go against the idea of a financial outcome because they're spending money that's really probably not generating sufficient revenue. But maybe they're thinking down the road it will, whatever. The point that I'm trying to make with my example here is that these could be competing, right? They don't necessarily all have to go into harmony. So if you take a look here, you can see that we have these different strategic goals, okay? And then for each one of them, what they do is they list those, and this table is not the easiest thing to read. This lines up with 1, and they really should have like a darker line or something under that. This one lines up with what, 2? I think, this kind of, it goes this way. And then this one lines up with 3. And a little balanced scorecard here. And this one lines up with 4. Okay, I'm just pulling the numbers off of here, right? Okay, so then once we have those different things, then really they start talking about tactics to achieve these. And notice they break them out in financial perspective, internal business process, customer service, advancing learning, innovation. So now we're sitting here and we're taking our strategic goals and lining them up with these different critical success factors. And now they start talking about, okay, we have to maintain our customer base here and tactics and measures, steadily expand services. And then we're able to translate that into things that we can measure, percentage of sale, okay? You look at critical success factor, anticipate customer needs before competitors, okay? And so what happens? Percentage of products in R&D being tested, marketed. And guys, it's not like there's a set list of tactics or a set list of measures here or a set list of strategic goals. We're just simply saying that as you sit here and you look at these different critical success factors, how would you then go ahead and put together a strategy, and then how would you measure tactics to achieve the strategy, and how would you measure that as you're moving towards that strategy? Okay. Okay, good. Cost of quality. Okay, and let's just go ahead and take a look. Conformance cost and conformance cost, okay, are classified as prevention and appraisal cost. Okay, now prevention, you can flashcard that, but let's also flashcard the nature of prevention cost. Prevention costs prevent the bad thing from happening, right? So training, inspecting, okay, preventative maintenance, redesign, search for higher quality suppliers, higher quality supplies, then obviously, okay. Appraisal cost is, well, what does it cost us to identify the problem? And this is before it goes out, right? Because we're talking about conformance costs here, okay? So let's just take a look. Appraisal cost, statistical quality checks, testing, inspection, maintenance of the laboratory, whatever, okay? Flashcard that. Now, when we talk about non-conforming costs, okay, well, what is the cost if we fail, if we don't produce, say, the units correctly? What happens? Well, we can break those into internal and external costs. So now, flashcard that your non-conforming costs can be internal or external. And then, guys, yeah, we're doing a lot of flashcards here. Then what is internal versus external failure? Okay, internal means what? The bad thing happens, but we identified internally, so we have to rework, we have to scrap, maybe we damage some machinery, so we have to make tooling changes. You can't just throw stuff into the garbage, maybe. We have to, specially handle some of those things, so we have to dispose it. Cost of the lost unit, downtime because we had a problem, we had to, with our machinery, we had to stop production while we fixed the problem, etc., right? External failure comes where we find out about the failure after the product gets out the door. Warranty costs, cost of return goods, liability claims, right? Lost customers, they just say, hey, I'm not doing this and I'm not using this company anymore because there's a problem, right? They don't even talk about what reputation costs here, okay? But that could be an example of an external failure. Okay, all right, good. All right, you don't need a flashcard for the types of failures. We've already done that. Our types of conformance cost, appraisal, prevention, and then our for our conformance cost, prevention, and appraisal. For non-conforming, we've already flashcarded those now: internal failure and external failure, the specific nature of those. Okay, all right, good. So let's go ahead and look at a couple questions here. We're going to see if we know how to classify some of these costs as to whether they're appraisal, prevention, etc. Okay, good, guys. Let's go ahead and I'll give you a few more minutes on that, a few more seconds. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one. And okay, most of you got this right. That's a good turnout, I guess about 79% got it right. So we need to look at this one and figure out, well, which one of these or which of these, I don't know which one of these, but which of these is a prevention and appraisal cost. Okay, so you start to look, and how about rework? Well, rework is what? Is an internal failure cost, isn't it? So that's not going to be prevention or appraisal. How about equipment maintenance? Yeah, that is a prevention, right? How about product testing? Yeah, we got to test the product, right? How about product repair? That's going to be what? That's another internal failure cost. So we picked up the two that we identified as prevention. We pick up the two that we identified as prevention, and that gives us 1940. Okay. Okay, good. How about this one? Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question. And yeah, good. Okay, so that's going to be an example of an internal failure, which is what is going to be our rework. Only A corresponds to that. Okay. So let's just look at that one real quick, just to make sure I'm saying the right thing there. Quality control program. Which of the following are categorized as what? Internal failures, rework. Responding to customer complaints is going to be what? Is going to be an external failure. Statistical quality control procedures would be what? Would be a conformance cost, not a failure Okay. Okay, good. Let's come over. So those things are purely definitional, guys. That's why I kind of asked you to do all those flashcards.
Can you
Okay.
remove the poll from the middle of the screen, please?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
That's okay.
That I had taken it down already. I think I put it back up. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the some of these measures, and we get back into some ratios here, and we have return on investment. I'm looking at this income divided by investment capital. They give us profit margin times investment turnover as another way of measuring return on investment. And I guess they're giving that to us, that if the question just gives us, say, the investment turnover already calculated, or they give us the profit margin already calculated, then they're likely going to ask you to go ahead and pick out the elements to calculate whatever the other one is that they give you, and expect you to know that it's the combination of the two. If they just give you this, then you don't need to go through this process, okay? So you come over and you take a look at an example here. And so notice they gave us what? They gave us the 250,000 as the invested capital. They gave us the net income of 40,000. And so if you just simply took what? The 40,000, divide that by the 250,000, that is going to give you this 16%, which is the answer here. Okay. Yeah, you could do it this long way, but I don't see the point in doing that the long way when they gave us the elements that we needed here. But I guess what they're trying to emphasize to you is they have just gave you, say, this ratio, and then, gave you this information, then you would know that you could turn this part of the equation times whatever that ratio was into the correct answer, the 16%. Okay. Okay, good. Come over and let's.
I'm a little confused by that, actually, because they're saying that they're calculating ROI as, they're saying it's sales as a percentage of invested capital, and then you come over to the next page and it's net income over invested capital.
Well, they're using,
Okay.
I mean, you can just do this, mathematically.
Okay.
It comes out to the same thing as what they're saying. But I think the reason, Kathy, they're kind of showing it, because to me, just give me this, okay? Just give me the income and invested capital and I'm freaking done, right? But the problem is that the exam doesn't do that. If they gave you this ratio and then they gave you the pieces to do this, you'd have to do this and then multiply it times that ratio, right? To be able to answer the question. I think that's the reason they're trying to show you that relationship.
Is it net income or is it just income?
Net income.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, they're doing this in case, like, what would you do if you go back, let me just use this as an example to do the math on that. But if you took 40,000, right, and you divided it times 1,000,000, you'd get 0.04. Right? And then if they told you, and that 0.04 in this example, now which one is that? That's net income divided by sales. So that's giving you the profit margin, right? And then if they took the 1,000,000 and they divided that by the 250,000, that would give me 4 as the turnover, right? So then if you took the 4 times 0.04, that gives you 0.16, right? So the reason they're doing this is if they just gave me this and they just gave me this, I could still come up with the return on investment, right? Hello? Guys? Somebody?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. So that's the only point. You know, I'm saying if they give me this, I'm done, which they did in this problem. So it gets a little confusing. Well, what the hell are they doing? They're just trying to show you the relationship in case they just gave you the ratios. If they give you this and they give you this, which they did, to calculate the return on investment, you would just do this and be done. Okay, I think I've said enough about that. Okay, all right, return on assets, okay, is going to be net income divided by the total assets. You can flashcard that, guys. I don't know what else to tell you. Okay, that's how you calculate it, okay? How you value assets in these different, return on investment and return on assets. There's different ways. Net book value, I think you know by now. Historical cost minus depreciation. Gross book value, historical cost prior to reduction. Replacement cost, liquidity value. Okay, I'm thinking the most common one is this right here, because these other things really are highly subjective, right? But everyone understands that we report on assets on our financial reports at their historical cost less accumulated depreciation, right? Okay, good. Come over and limitations of return on investment, and it does have a short-term focus. Okay, so it is sometimes referred to as investment myopia. Okay, also it could be a disincentive to make an investment, because what happens? Well, because of that short-term focus now, if I invest today, but it's going to take some time for that investment to have some return, in the short run, my return on investment is going to be lowered. And if I'm being evaluated by that, I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to look good. And so there could be some disadvantages there. Okay. Return on equity, guys, and I apologize if I'm insulting someone's intelligence here. I don't know what to tell you. Income divided by the equity. We know that equity, meaning our stockholders' equity, right? Okay. Now, we start to talk here about this Dupont analysis, okay? And let's just go ahead and start to take a look at the 3 steps to the Dupont analysis, which you can flashcard. Okay, and the 3 steps are going to see, well, what is my net profit margin, which we've already calculated, or already seen how that's calculated. Then we're going to have our asset turnover, which is going to be our sales divided by our assets, and then something called financial leverage. Okay, let's just go ahead and flashcard that, but let's talk for a second about financial leverage, because what this Dupont model has done has brought in financial leverage now as part of the consideration. We talked about the asset turnover, we talked about a profitability ratio, but we haven't talked about financial leverage. But well, not in this chapter, but we talked about it in another chapter, I forget which one now, in which the more debt you have, the higher your turnover is going to be, right? So let's say we're sitting here and we have our assets at 100. Okay, and let's say our equity is 40. Okay, so if that's the case, then by this calculation, my financial leverage is what? 2.5? Okay, now let's say that the company decides, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to increase our equity here component so that now our assets are going to sit here at 100. But instead, our equity is only going to constitute, say, 60 of that. So now when we do the calculation, we come out to what, 1.67? Okay, so what happens? The more debt we have, right? Because here we're having what, 60 of debt. Here we're only having 40 of debt. So the more debt that we have, the more leveraged we are, the higher our leverage. Now, if your debt is essentially a fixed debt, then you're in a position that once you cover that fixed interest, then you start having a much higher profitability at that point, because less of your revenue, once you've kind of broken even on that, less of your revenue is going to pay the debt. So they brought in this financial leverage. And so the Dupont model says, well, if you take those three ratio that we've already talked about, now we've talked about leverage, and you go ahead and you multiply those together, that's a good return on equity model that DuPont came up with. Also, you could just basically say, well, as we've already said, the return on assets times, now they've added the financial leverage, you could use that. Okay, now you could start to bring in tax burden to a certain extent. Okay, so you could bring that in, and that's basically net income divided by your pre-tax income. So that's basically telling you, how much of your net income is going towards tax, essentially. Interest burden, okay, you take your pre-tax income and you're going to divide that by earnings before interest and taxes. And then EBIT margin is basically going to take the sales divided by your EBIT. Okay. And then finally, they give us this extended DuPont, return on equity model here, this ROE. And I don't know, guys, just flashcard it and have fun with it. I don't know what to tell you. Flashcard that. Okay. All right, good. And they give us a comprehensive example where you can calculate each one of those. You can look at that on your own. All right. Okay, good. Let's start to talk about residual income now. And basically, the rate of return or hurdle rate for a company may be the weighted average cost of capital, or it may simply be return established by management as a target rate. And then our residual income is going to see to what extent have we hurdled that required return or that weighted average cost of capital, if that's what they've chosen to use. So residual income is your net income minus whatever the required return was. And the required return could be net book value times some sort of hurdle rate that they've come up with. And again, that hurdle rate could be your weighted average cost of capital. You really have to sort of read the question to see what they're calling out as the required return, the hurdle rate, whatever it is. So if you take a look at this question, we have our net income of 30,000. They have net book value, of the company 200,000, okay? Or I guess in this case, it's just a plant, not the whole company. And the hurdle rate, they tell us, is 10%. So if we have 30,000 of income and we've had a hurdle rate of 10% of the net book value of this plant, then we have residual income of 10,000. Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at the benefits of residual income. An advantage of using residual income, it is pretty easy. Okay, that's basically the thing that's an advantage of it. So go ahead and flashcard that. Weaknesses of residual income, and we have reduced comparability. Okay, it distorts comparison of units with unequal size. So you're going to have a higher hurdle rate if we had a larger investment. And so for those reasons, they say, you know, that is not the best measure. Okay, for the reasons that they've given us here. That's kind of obvious. Economic added value. Okay, what happens here? With economic added value, you can go ahead again. And guys, when I tell you to flashcard these formula, your first step, as you know by now, is to look into your flashcards to see if the flashcard's there. If it's not, add one for anything that's not there. Okay, so economic added value takes my net operating profit after taxes, okay, minus any required return. And required return, again, there's no set amount as to what the required return is, but it could be investment times the weighted average cost of capital. So you just have to really read the problem to see what they're calling out as a required return. Okay, but you do have to come up with this net operating profit after taxes, this NOPAT. Okay, and if we have a positive economic value added, then the performance is meeting standards. Negative means that it is not. Okay, so we want that number that comes out of that to be essentially a positive number. Okay. Couple of others, investment valuation issues and capitalization of research and development. We know that under general accepted accounting principles, US GAAP says what? Expense all research and development, right? Meanwhile, you know, if you're looking at Tesla's financial reports, you know, back a few years back, they were showing losses period after period because they were doing all this research and development leading up to this very desired technology, right? So research and development is a different type of expense. It's an expense that analysts could look at favorably. And that's really what they're talking about here is the organization may capitalize research and development costs. Now, again, that's not for financial reporting purposes. You cannot do that for financial reporting purposes, but for analysis, you could treat that as though it was an asset and then go ahead and look at the return on investment and whatnot, considering that as an asset as opposed to an expense, as opposed to reduction of net income. You could also use a current valuation of the balance sheet as well. Now, these are somewhat subjective ways of looking at things. And, you know, that's why FASB comes out and says, hey, you know, we're not going to get into this. We're telling you, carry things at historical cost and carry, you know, expense all research and development, right? And so, you know, this again is subjective as to how companies might choose, or an analyst or something may choose to look at some of this stuff. Okay. Net operating income before taxes may be adjusted to eliminate the effect of certain transactions and thereby create a nearly cash basis income statement. Adjustments to the balance sheet affect net income and deferred taxes are ignored. Okay, so let's just look at this example of economic value added. And they tell you manufacturer has an investment in the Southwest region, plant with an investment of 300,000 after adjustment for capitalization of research and development costs and revaluation of certain assets. So in this example, they decided to capitalize the research and development and decided to write up, I guess, certain assets. The company's cost of capital is 12%, and its division produces a net operating profit after taxes. Okay, so they gave us the NOPAT here at 50,000. We use that 300,000 times at 12%. Okay, now, you know, you may have a problem that's a little more difficult that may sit there and ask you to make the adjustments. If you're taking research and development out of expense, they give you the expense number, they give you the net income number, including research and development as an expense, then you'd have to take it out of expense and put it into assets, and you might have to go ahead and move those numbers around yourself. Here, they just sort of gave them to us after they made those adjustments. Okay. All right, good. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at a few questions. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this one. And I look at this one and I'm like, okay, why did they give me this external borrowing rate? And the answer is what? Simply to confuse me, and it didn't look like it confused any of you. We do what? We simply need to take the what? Operating profit of 40,000 divided by what? 250,000. That gives me the ROI for passenger. And then cargo is what? 50,000 divided by 500,000. That gives me ROI for cargo, passenger cargo. So when I do the math on this thing, I get what, 16% for passenger? What's that, 10% for cargo?
Yes, Professor.
Thank you. I have no idea what I don't know why, other than to make you think maybe that was a hurdle rate or something. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're doing there.
You might feel differently if the external borrowing rate, for passenger was much higher and for cargo was much lower, such that the differential would be, different. I mean, but that's not how you do what they ask you to do.
Right. That's the problem. And I think that's what they were trying to like trigger some further analysis that might cause you to come up with one of these other answers. I guess, Kathy, when I looked at the other answers, I was like, okay, I can't think of any analysis that would generate one of the other answers though. So anyway. Okay, let's look at question 2. So I guess what I'm saying is some of these questions just come down to knowing the ratios, right? Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. And looks like most of us got this one right, but let's go through it together. Okay, answer is B. And so let me get that off the screen. All right, good. So let's look at this one. Number 2. Minton purchased a long-term asset on the last day of the current year. What are the effects of the repurchase on the return on investment? Well, what happened? Return on investment, we calculate as what? How do you calculate ROI?
Net income over the asset or the investment.
Good, net income divided by the investment. So if you make an investment on the last day of the year, what are the chances that you generate any net income off of that?
Very low.
None. There's no, I don't know what investment returns on the last day or in one day. Okay, and so what happens? Most likely, what we're going to have is a what? Decrease. Oh, I'm answering the wrong question here. Purchase long-term asset on the last day. What are the effects of the purchase on return on investment and residual income? So return on investment is what? Definitely a decrease because what? The numerator went up and there was no corresponding increase in the numerator. Residual income, now I've got what? A larger base that I'm going to be multiplying whatever that required rate of return is by. Meanwhile, there was no time for the net income to go up. So what? It's going to decrease in both cases. In other words, you're not going to have enough time to generate income off the investment. Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at question number 3.
Professor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I might not be here for the last part of this. I'm dealing with a pet emergency right now.
Okay. Hope he's okay, or she.
Yeah, she'll be fine, but I'm just trying to make appointments and everything.
Okay. I'm going to give you a little more time with this one, guys. We're at the 2-minute mark, but this one has a couple steps in it, so I'll give you a little more time. Okay, we're coming up on the 3-minute mark, so I don't want to go over the 3 minutes because we really shouldn't take more than that with the question. When we're practicing, it's okay, but by the time you're on the exam, never take more than 3 minutes for a question, okay? And you should be averaging more like about 1.5 minutes per question. All right, good, but we'll work on speed as we move along. But the correct answer here is C, okay? And most of us got it, but let's just go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, most of us got that one right. Okay, but let's just take a look at it. The answer is C. They want to know what is the return on equity. Okay, now we know that to get the return on equity, we need what? We need to know what their net income is, right? So they tell us that they have 2 million here. Okay, that they have 2 million here as a sales and a profit margin of 11. So to get the numerator here, I'm going to take the 2 million. I'm going to multiply it by what? 0.11, the 11%. And I've got the numerator in this. I'm halfway done with this, 220,000, right? Then I've got to figure out the equity. Now, of course, assets minus liabilities equals equity, right? Okay. So if they're sitting there and they say they decided to reduce their debt ratio from 40 to 40 from 50, well, that's telling me that what? There's really going to take 2 million and 60% of that is going to be equity, isn't it? That E is standing for equity. So if I take 2 million, wait a minute, what am I doing wrong? Assets, I'm sorry, are 2 million what?
500.
2,500,000, thank you. Okay, so if I take that 2,500,000, just picking up the assets, and they're telling me, well, their debt ratio is going to go to 40%. Well, that means then that the equity is going to be 60%. So 2.5 times the 0.6 means that what? The denominator in my formula is going to be 1,500,000. Just taking 0.6 times 2,500,000, that should give me now 14.7% the answer. Okay. Okay, good. Let's look at question 4. Okay, guys, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. Looks like there might be some confusion on this one. So do your best in the next few seconds to wrap this one up. All right, good. Let's take a look at this. And okay, most of us got it right, but not a beautiful percentage. We're at 58% on this one. So let's just go ahead and let's take a look at this one together. Now, when we're talking about our economic added value, we're talking about to the extent that our NOPAT, our net operating income after taxes, right? Net operating profit, NOP, after taxes, AT NOPAT, is exceeding a hurdle rate. Okay, now when we talked about hurdle rate, we said, well, it could be the weighted average cost of capital. Now they don't call out the weighted average cost of capital here, but they give me the elements to be able to calculate that. Okay, so what happens? I sit here and I'm going to first get the NOPAT. Okay, and so if I have pre-tax operating income of 300 million, and my tax rate is what? 40%, then my NOPAT is 1 minus what? 0.4 or 0.6. So I take the 300 million times 0.6, that gives me 180 million. That's my NOPAT, right? But to figure out the economic added value now, I have to sit here and see to what extent I've cleared that. So I know that D is wrong because there's no way it could be that because I don't have enough coverage to exceed that because I have to figure out my hurdle rate. So they sit here and they say, well, the company does what? The company capital used to generate profits, 50% debt, 50% equity, 1.2 million. Okay, so that means that I'm what? 600,000 equity, 600,000 debt. I'll just go ahead and put a little E here versus D. We're back to our weighted average cost of capital. And then they tell us for equity, it's what? It's 15%. And for debt, it's 5%. It really doesn't matter because I could shake the whole number and I probably multiply it times 20%, but I like to make sure I know what I'm doing. And so I go ahead and not 600,000, but what, 6 million? Right? Half of 12 million. And then I just do the math on those and what I've got, what am I doing wrong? Is it 6 million or 600 million?
What we used was 1.2 billion.
Yeah, so it's
So that's-
600 million. You think a guy who worked for the government all those years would be used to all those big numbers. 600 million. Is that 600 million? Okay, that gives me what? 15%, that gives me 90 million. Maybe that's the problem with this stupid question. The numbers are too big. And this gives me what, 30 million?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. And you subtract those two, and now we've got what, 60 million left over?
Yes.
Yep.
Choice B. Okay. All right, guys. Not, exactly that last half after the break. I don't see that, we're getting anything terribly enlightening here other than knowing that for the BEC section of the exam now, there are a ton of formulas, ratios that we have to at least be comfortable enough with to work through the questions. First part of chapter 3, the cost accounting stuff, remember I said that's about 15 points. These other things, you know, not a real high point value, but you can't just ignore them. Your best bet is to get the flashcards for these, okay? Now, I was hoping we'd get into chapter 4 today. That's okay, we're still on schedule. We'll start it next time. But for chapter 4, we're going to see that there is a little bit more of this sort of ratio analysis, that sort of thing. And then in the back half of chapter 4, we get into some heavy areas on the exam, particularly variance analysis. And so we're moving back towards some areas that are going to be a little more, you know, less memorizing formula and more really intuitively, you know, technically understanding what we're doing with some of these. Okay. All right. Any questions, guys?
I have a question, but after class, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. What I'm going to do is pause, end the recording though. There's no questions about any of this particular subject matter here. So
I too have a question for afterwards, not recorded.
yeah, okay, cool. So I have stopped the recording, I believe, okay? And so that should be stopped now. So
It's still showing recording.
oh, I keep telling it to stop recording, so I don't know what the problem is. Yeah, I see that. Let me try it one more time. Stop recording, click on that. It won't stop. Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and end the meeting, and then the folks that want to talk to me, why don't you go ahead and come back in? Okay, and we'll just come back because it's one.
Actually, Professor, if you just want to answer my email tomorrow, that'll do it for me, and I don't need to waste your time this evening.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not sure if I can answer the email without talking to you, but if I can, I will.
Oh, okay.
If not, I may ask you to.
Well, if you want, I'll hang out. So I should go back onto the Zoom session again after you terminate it.
Yeah, because it won't stop. I keep clicking stop recording and it won't stop. So I'm going to end the meeting, see if it lets me do that, and then come back.
Okay, great.
I have a question before you we leave.
You know, look, I don't want to record a bunch of personal questions, okay? Because then that makes it difficult for me to post the material. So if you want to come back,
It's not personal though, so I just want to ask about the material.
Okay, oh, okay, go ahead.
I know there is a flashcard and a Becker website. Is there any way we can get them printed so it's easier to hold them anywhere we go and review them?
Where's Matthew when you need him? I was pretty sure that we had figured out a way to print the flashcards. Amra, did you figure that out at some point?
Honestly, I prefer handwritten, so I actually hand wrote all of my flashcards just because it helps me remember. But I think there is a way to do it. Let me go to it really quick. Hold on.
Kathy, if you don't want to hang on forever for this past the time, if you want to try to reach out to me to set a time to talk tomorrow, we can do that tomorrow.
Yeah, or your office hours the appropriate time for that?
You could, well, we could talk tomorrow if you want to do the office hour. I'll be sitting there. Either way.
The office hour, it says Wednesdays, and tomorrow would be a Tuesday.
Correct. So you want to do it tomorrow or during the office hour?
Oh, your choice. I've got a few. Let me take a look at my schedule. I've got a few conference calls.
Let's just do the office hour then. Okay.
Okay. So Wednesday.
Send me an email and propose a time.
Okay. Fantastic.
That way we don't have
Great.
to squeeze it in tonight, okay?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so what I need to do here.
I did not find a way to print those. I don't think you can view it in like a way where you can print all of them. I couldn't find it.
Sorry, I'm just returning. What are we referring to? Printing?
We were wondering if you had figured out a way to print the flashcards.
Oh, I haven't personally, no.
Yeah, I just hand wrote all of mine, but
Why did I think I saw? Probably they're not doing it because they don't want people to share it, so they've not created that. But
I
you
saw
know,
that you can purchase them for like almost
$50, yeah.
yeah, but I thought if there's any way we can get them like
but
for
guys,
them.
help me quickly to find the flashcards. Is this them?
yeah,
Yes.
that's
Okay, and then BEC, right? And now what do they want me to do? Hit this arrow?
yeah. So all you can really do is pick which chapter. Yeah, and then that's it.
There's no printing. But
There-
what you can do is you see this thing right here? I mean, it's going to be somewhat laborious, but you go to new, you know, and you can do this, edit, copy. You could actually probably print it from here now, but you can definitely edit, copy, and then go to say Word. And put it in there, and then unfortunately, you know, you gotta go back, flip the answer. What? How do I flip it? Click to flip. And then that's the answer, and then you gotta do another clip. Right? And I'm sure you guys have better skills than I do at like using this kind of stuff. But
Also
there
an
it is.
app. I
Huh?
mean, you can also have it on your phone as an app, if that's helpful.
Yeah, you can get off your phone as well. But if you want hard copies of all the flashcards, you're gonna have to do it this way, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. I'm going to end the meeting because it won't let me stop. I will log back in. If you have a question, come back. Sorry, guys, because I don't want to record personal conversations and it won't let me stop it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good night.
Bye.